Coming up on Network Africa. Mozambique troops fighting to regain control of the key airport of Mocimboa da Praia, following multiple reports that it had fallen to Islamist militants. Fears for the tourism industry in Mauritius as almost all the oil is now removed from a damaged Japanese ship. Plus, Rwanda expresses doubts on the willingness of neighboring Burundi to normalize diplomatic ties. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Mozambique says its troops are fighting to regain control of the key port of Mocimboa da Praia, following multiple reports that it had fallen to Islamist militants on Wednesday. The city is near the site of natural gas projects worth $60 billion, and the military says there is an ongoing action to neutralize the Islamists who have been using the local population as shields. This follows days of fighting for the port in the country's gas-rich north. The loss of the city is seen as a serious blow to Mozambique's military, who are struggling to contain a growing rebellion in the gas-rich province of Cabo Delgado. Mocimboa da Praia is used for cargo deliveries to the offshore projects about 60 kilometers away, which are being developed by oil giants. Now, a curfew has been imposed in Sudan's main seaport, Port Sudan, following ethnic fighting which left more than 30 people dead. About 100 people were also wounded, including members of the security forces. There have been several days of clashes between the Nuba and Beni Ama tribes, which have a long history of violence. The two groups signed a peace deal last September after fierce fighting, and the Sudan's transitional government faces many challenges, including an economic crisis and insecurity in several regions of the country. Now, the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Pravin Jugnauth, says that almost all the oil had now been removed from a damaged Japanese ship, which has leaked an estimated 1,000 tons of oil off the Mauritius coast. All fuel had been removed from tanks, but there was some residue in parts of the ship. However, there are fears for the tourism industry as tourist operators who are already reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic fear a further damage to their businesses.
Tourism operators in Mauritius, already reeling from the pandemic, fear that an oil spill from a Japanese ship would further damage their businesses and could potentially cost jobs if their pristine beaches are spoiled. In the month of May, the central bank said that in the 2 previous months alone, the nation had lost 12 billion rupees in foreign exchange due to the fall in tourism. Willow River Tuncan, who owns a kite surfing business, said local guides would be among the hardest hit.
It's definitely going to have a huge impact, especially because of the whole crisis with Corona. It's really, really bad, especially on that side of the island. It basically lives off tourism. There's a lot of hotels all along the southeast coast of the island, well, actually around the whole island, but it's going to really affect the communities down there, especially for the fishermen, for the local guys that live there. You know, that's how they make money, you know, with the tourists, taking them out to go diving, to go snorkeling, to go wakeboarding, to go see dolphins and all that kind of thing, you know, and all of that's going to affect it. If we don't kind of get it under control very soon.
The MV Wakashio struck a reef and went aground off the southeast Mauritius coast on July the 25th. It began leaking oil last Thursday. Mauritius declared a state of emergency last Friday and cleanup attempts have been ongoing. The island nation's prime minister says nearly all remaining oil had been removed from the ship. The southeast coast, where the oil spill happened, is famous for snorkeling, kite surfing, and people visiting the flora and fauna of Mauritius.
Well, Tanzanians and Kenyans have been tweeting about their experiences when a 6.0 magnitude earthquake hit Tanzania's capital city of Dar es Salaam. The seismic waves were felt in the coastal parts of Kenya and the capital Nairobi on Wednesday evening. With no damage reported, the offshore quake struck at a depth of 15.5 kilometers. Its epicenter was near the commercial hub of Dar es Salaam, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Now, this comes days after residents living around Kenya's Lake Baringo reported tremors as water levels in the lake rise because of ongoing rains. The tremors were reported by people living as far as 7 kilometers from the lake and were said to have mostly happened at night for the last 2 weeks. A top official in Kenya's health ministry has died of COVID-19 as the country battles to contain rising infection and deaths. Kamau Mugenda was the second in charge at Kenya's Medical Research Institute, which oversees the country's COVID-19 testing and vaccine trials program. It's believed that he's among more than 450 workers in the health ministry who have contacted the deadly disease. Officials say at least 3 frontline healthcare workers, a doctor and 2 nurses have also succumbed to the virus, with Mr. Kamau now being the 4th. Kenya has seen a sharp rise in COVID-19 cases over the past few weeks. Despite imposing strict measures to deal with the virus, cases have more than doubled over the past days. Now we have Cyrus Ombati joining us now for more on the COVID-19 fight in Kenya. Thank you, Cyrus, for speaking to us. Just give us an overview. What is the situation of things with regards to COVID-19 in Kenya?
Good afternoon. Here in Kenya, the COVID-19 pandemic is still on a rising trend. The cases being detected, especially in Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya. Given the number of people being tested daily on a daily basis and those who are found to be positive, you can say it's around between 10 and 13%, which is within the allowed kind of cases, or which can show it's stable. But still, according to officials, the numbers higher could be higher because we have a challenge in testing of these cases because the country still lacks enough reagents to be able to spread out or to roll out a mass testing program across the country. So you can't really say that the curve is being addressed, rather the curve is being nabbed from increasing. Those are the fears, and that's why you saw the U.S. included Kenya as among the countries which are kind of a threat in terms of COVID-19 pandemic for their people to visit. The disease is spreading fast because you see, like yesterday, the other day, actually, a senior director in charge of corporate communication at the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, which is the lead agency in terms of recording and testing all these cases, died out of this disease. Mr. Kamau Mugenda was buried today after the death because of the rules that have been put in place to ensure that bodies of those who die out of disease are buried almost immediately. I mean, it's an indication that the disease can catch or can infect anybody, and the government used this death as a kind of as an example that it's not discriminating. Even those doctors or those officials handling the medical facilities are being infected. They're using the whole message to rally the country to be careful, to observe all those rules that are in place to ensure that they don't get infected. I mean, KEMRI is the lead agency in terms of testing and keeping the data of all these infectious diseases. The death of this director was a shock to many because KEMRI is also leading, is in the lead in terms of trying to get to liaise with the international agencies to get the vaccine for the disease. So the death of Mr. Kamau Mugenda was a shock, and was telling a kind of story on the danger of this disease.
Indeed, COVID-19 is not a respecter of anyone. And how are the health facilities coping at this time?
Hospitals are overwhelmed, to be honest. Every day, the medical personnel or the Minister of Health is crying that we have a challenge in bed capacity across the country. We have 47 counties, and each of these counties is supposed to have had 300 ICU beds. And I mean, half of them don't have, which is a challenge. Nairobi is overwhelmed. So they are forced now to offload the extra number of patients to the nearby counties, which are also facing a challenge of the same in terms of bed capacity. When you hear the American government telling their people that Kenya may be faced with a challenge of medical attention to this disease, they are right. I agree with them, because there's a problem. Like now, if you walk to any hospital that you want and say you want to be attended to in regard to this disease, no one will attend to you. They'll tell you wait, and you may die while waiting at a bay. So it's a problem, to be honest. Thank you so much.
All right then, Sarah Sombati, Kenyan journalist, thank you for speaking to us on the program. The World Health Organization is targeting 2.1 million children in Borno State here in Nigeria for vaccination against malaria in its seasonal malaria chemo prevention campaign. Administration of the second dose has commenced, with emphasis on children living in IDP camps considered most vulnerable.
El Miskin Internally Displaced Persons Camp is a host community shelter in Jere local government area, Maiduguri, the Borno State capital. Children in the camps are considered the most vulnerable, which is why the World Health Organization is spearheading a community outreach program to protect them from malaria infection. The seasonal malaria chemo prevention campaign was flagged off last month, and the second dose is being administered to children between the ages of 3 and 59 months.
The campaign is recommended to hold at least 3 to 4 times in a year during the peak rainy season, so that we can protect the children during that period. So we are out again this August to also do the same thing, to reach out to these 2.1 million children that we were able to reach last cycle, to continue to protect them. Like I told us, this drug has effects up to 35 days in the child system. So we need to get the drug back into the children's system so that we can have that blood concentration enough to give them the protection for the time that is required. And we'll also go out again in September to do so.
The Borno State coordinator for the malaria elimination program explains that the children are prone to malaria infection, hence the need to prioritize their vaccination.
These IDP children in IDP camps are more vulnerable to mosquito bite because they are not in a formal, housing where you have window fitting that can stop malaria from getting in access. So when we start distributing net, we always prioritize the IDP camp. And the same thing when we are doing this intervention. So we are covering all the IDP camps across the state.
The drugs are very useful. Those that have taken it said it is very effective. They told me to melt 2 of the tablets and give it to the child.
Over 2 million children are being targeted by the World Health Organization for the 2020 seasonal malaria chemo prevention campaign, and this 3-phase vaccination will help reduce the chances of children contracting malaria.
All media reports from Egypt say a leading member of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood movement has died in prison after suffering a heart attack. 66-year-old Essam Al-Erian was arrested in 2013 following the overthrow of Mohamed Morsi's government by the military. He was serving several life sentences at the Torah prison in southern Cairo when he died. Now, there has been no official announcement of his death, but it was reported by both pro-government and pro-Brotherhood websites. Mr. Arian's lawyer also confirmed his death. Still ahead on the program. Helping man's best friend, veterinarians in Sierra Leone fight to save stray dogs from the COVID-19 neglect. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Rwanda's foreign minister has expressed doubts on the willingness of neighboring Burundi to normalize diplomatic ties. This comes after last week's remarks by Burundi's new president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, that his country will never have relations with a country that uses irony in its relations. Mr. Ndayishimiye is accusing Rwanda of holding hostage nearly 72,000 Burundian refugees. However, the foreign minister of Rwanda, Vincent Biruta, has denied these accusations. The refugees fled to Rwanda in 2015 during Burundi's political crisis, following a declaration by former President Pierre Nkurunziza that he would vie for a controversial third term. The repatriation of the refugees has been a sticking point between the neighbors who accuse each other of harboring their respective enemies. Now, the state-run Ethiopian Human Rights Commission says around 9,000 people have been arrested since June 29th, shooting of a musician that sparked days of protests and killed more than 178 people. Among those detained is opposition activist Dejene Tafa. His wife now says her husband is being held without charge and has contracted the COVID-19 virus in prison.
According to the state-run Human Rights Commission, more than 9,000 people have been detained after deadly clashes last month in Ethiopia. This raises fears that a government hailed for reforms is returning to the iron-fisted tactics of past administrations. Among those detained, opposition activist Dejene Tafa, whom police dragged from his bed in the middle of the night on July the 8th as he slept next to his pregnant wife, Aslefek Mulatu. Dejene is a university professor and secretary of the Oromo Federalist Congress Party. Aslefek Mulatu said her husband is being held without charge and has contracted COVID-19 in prison.
A week after he was jailed, they said he's been infected with the coronavirus. They deliberately tried to infect him by putting him in a room that was occupied by 14 people who were victims of COVID-19, and they didn't even disinfect the room.
Tegena Regasa, spokesman for Ethiopia's health ministry, confirmed Dejene had been hospitalized for COVID-19, but said he had recovered. Dejene had already spent 2 years in prison without charge for taking part in street protests that toppled the previous prime minister, his wife said. Activists like Fiseye Tekle, Amnesty International's Ethiopia analysts, fear that Prime Minister Abiy's government is resorting to arbitrary mass arrests of his predecessor.
The latest trend is that the government is going back to the iron fist methods. And they are still detaining people without proper investigation. There are protracted pre-trial detentions happening.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who came to power in 2018 promising democratic changes in one of Africa's most repressive nations, is struggling to rein in resurgent ethnic nationalism that sporadically explodes in bouts of violence.
Well, COVID-19 is really affecting a lot of people, including animals. Dr. Jalor of the Sierra Leone Animal Welfare Society is one of Freetown's handful veterinarians. For the last 5 months, Dr. Jalor and his team have been driving through the streets of Freetown in a converted ambulance to treat the neglected stray dogs. Take a look.
The rainy season brings fly strikes, explains Dr. Gudus Jallo, one of just a handful of veterinarians in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, as he inspects the inside of a stray dog's ear with an otoscope. As he treats the tranquilized animal in his converted ambulance, Dr. Jallo says dogs tend to worsen the condition by incessantly scratching the affected area, which then gets infected. When businesses in Sierra Leone began closing their doors ahead of the COVID-19 pandemic, Jallo and his team of dedicated staff at the Sierra Leone Animal Welfare Society feared for the safety of the thousands of neglected and vulnerable stray dogs roaming Freetown.
To protect ourselves from the COVID outbreak, but this animal has been depending on people, especially along the beaches. They go there, they live on leftovers from people. After that, they will say, oh no, these animals are there, they have nowhere to feed anymore. The restaurants are closed, they are scavenging there, there's no more food, the dumps are empty. Then we say, now what do we do? Then we think about it, how to feed these dogs.
It was junior veterinarian Teddy Mana who proposed that Slows take steps to help the city's strays. Having grown up with many pets in a country where animals are often mistreated, Mana developed a deep affinity for animal welfare that eventually led him to Dr. Gudus Jallo. At least once a week, Mana distributes food to the dogs that congregate on and around Freetown beaches, where he says many are abandoned by owners who fell out of love with them.
Because people will go to take a dog because it's very young and chubby, and when the dog begins to go and lose some of those cuteness, they tend to just bring them to the beach, abandon them. And people don't take their dogs to the veterinary clinic for sterilization, vaccination. And so with just simple mange or skin problem, people become fed up and they just bring them down to the beach as a dumping ground.
A nationwide survey conducted by Njala University found that Sierra Leone has per capita the highest population of stray dogs in West Africa, and with more than 150,000 living on the streets of Freetown alone, which is one of the highest in the world.
In Amboseli National Park in Kenya, elephants were fitted with tracking collars as part of an event to mark the World Elephant Day. The collars were attached by veterinarians in order to help protect the animals from poachers. Kenya's elephant numbers more than doubled between 1989 and 2018 thanks to increased anti-poaching efforts as well as a jump in new births. According to Kenya Wildlife Service, there has been a record jump in births at the National Park, with 138 newborn calves welcomed this year.
Launched the Magical Kenya Elephant Naming Campaign. We want to use the success story of conservation and the numbers of elephants that have grown into this country to celebrate the conservation program and the community involvement in conservation by profiling Amboseli and the people of Amboseli. In the last couple of years, we have managed to tame poaching in this country. Our number of poached elephants from January to today has been 7. We regret it has been 7. Last year were 34 elephants poached. The year before, there were 80 elephant poached. So you could see the numbers have gone down.
We always need to protect the wildlife. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Bye for now.